Hello, my name is Steve Kaufman, and welcome to part 3 of our React.Go tutorial. Okay, in the last episode, we left off here with our first use case, get-to-dos, fully tested and ready to go. In this episode, we're going to cover how to hook it up to our front end using Go's net HTTP package. And we're just going to use a simple in-memory repository for now. In a later episode, we'll switch that to SQLite, but memory will work just fine for right now. If you haven't seen the first 2 episodes, I highly recommend going and watching those first, that you will be all caught up on what's going on here. So, in order to figure out what we need to do next, I've gone ahead and created this UML diagram to describe what our final application is going to look like here, at least once we're done with our get-to-dos part of it. So let's go ahead and zoom in on this inner circle. This inner circle here is our use cases architectural segment. So it's the most protected layer of our architecture. It doesn't get to know anything about details. It doesn't know that we're using HTTP. It doesn't know that we are using a memory database, or if we were using SQL, it wouldn't know anything about what SQL database we're using. All it knows is that we have a function, a use case, get-to-dos, and there are 2 different interfaces here. That's all that gets to happen in this inner circle. Okay, so moving out here in our second circle, this is going to include some concrete implementations of our interfaces. So our HTTP server implements this UI interface. That's what this arrow with the open end on it means. That means it implements it, or it is a UI, whereas this closed arrow means has a. So closed arrow, you can think of it as has a, open arrow is a. So our UI interface has a service, our service has a to-dos repository, but our HTTP server is a UI, it implements it. Okay, now zooming out one more level, we have our main package, and our main package has a service, it has an HTTP server, it has a memory DB. So the main package is probably just going to be that one main function where we instantiate our HTTP server, our database, and our service where we put it all together. Alrighty, without further ado, let's go ahead and get started on this HTTP server. So the HTTP server is going to be neither an entity or a use case because it exists outside that inner circle, that inner boundary. It's not part of our business logic. It's just the transport for our data, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new folder named after that interface that we talked about in the UML diagram, UI. Okay, and then inside that folder, we will have our HTTP server. This is going to be in the package, if VS Code wants to load my auto suggestions. Okay, it's being too slow. It's going to be package UI. Then we'll go ahead and create the test file at the same time. So http test.go package UI test. First thing that we're going to do is we know that our HTTP server depends on the service, right? And I think that for this application, we want to go ahead and mock out that service when we're testing our HTTP server. We'll just go ahead and create a mock service. And the mock service it's got one method on it currently that we know about. It has this get-to-dos method. So what we'll go ahead and do is, since this is a mock, we want the capability to return some dummy to-dos or an error. So we'll just make those fields in the struct. So error and to-dos. Okay, And we'll define the mock services function, get to-dos. And that's inconsistent, isn't it? It's get all to-dos in the repository, so it should be get all to-dos here. Okay, and this will return an array of entities.todo or an error. And we actually want to bring this in. We'll do s for service. If s.error not equal nil, return nil error, s.error. Otherwise, we'll return s.todos nil. Excellent. So that will give us the capability to just be like, oh, and mock service, and input an error if we want an error, if we want the mock service to return an error, or we can input some to-dos if we wanted to return to-dos. So that'll be a really useful mock service for us in this testing. Okay, our actual test function. So like I mentioned before, the HTTP server is going to have this use service method so that it can take in a service dependency. It's also going to implement HTTP handler. That's what it's called. So it's going to have this serve HTTP method on it as well. If you're not familiar with Go's HTTP package, I would recommend reading up on that a little bit, because I'm not going to cover it too closely. And if you don't know how it works, you're going to be pretty confused about how we're testing it here. We are going to be using Go's HTTP test package to test it. So we're not going to be actually spinning up the server and making real HTTP calls to it. We're just going to be creating dummy inputs and outputs for our serve HTTP function. First of all, we'll make our mock service here. In this one, we just want to return some random error, and then we want to get a 404 back. So that'll be our first test. Our service is going to be a new mock service with an error of format.errorf, something bad happened. Very vague. Okay, then we'll make our mock response writer. At this point, you will be confused if you don't know how Go's HTTP package works. So we'll make this an HTTP test new recorder. This will allow us to test what our serve HTTP method basically outputs, what it writes back as the response. And then we'll do R as an HTTP test new request. And I suppose we'll just do http mywebsite.com, because it doesn't matter what the domain or the scheme is. And just the root, I think, is going to be fine, because this is sort of our to-dos service, I guess. So the root endpoint can be for all to-dos. And then, oh, I'm sorry, this is the wrong. We need our method first, body of nil. And our method's going to be http.method.get. Now we should just be able to go ahead and say server is UI dot new HTTP. And of course, we're getting some red underline here because our UI package has no such method new HTTP. So we'll go ahead and implement that. Type HTTP server struct func new HTTP returns an HTTP server return and HTTP server. And then hit Control S here to bring in that package. Okay, and we're getting a bunch of red underlines here still because we haven't used these variables, and it really doesn't like that. So what we'll go ahead and do now is we'll do server.use service. Oops. And of course it doesn't have that method, so we'll say func HTTP server use service, s, it's going to be a service. And we don't have access to this mock service struct from here because it's in a test package. We can't import it. So what we're going to have to do is indirect that, which is exactly what we want. We want to depend on an interface instead of a concrete type here. So we'll go ahead and create a file called interfaces.go in package UI and type service interface. And of course it has just that one method, get to do's, which returns a list of entities.todo or an error. Now this should be, oh, I'm sorry, I did the wrong signature. For the interface, let's get all to-dos. I'm going to go ahead and change that in the UML as well. Get all to-dos, oops. Okay, now it's happy. Last step here, server.serve HTTP WR. And we have no serve HTTP method, so we'll just go ahead and implement that. Now our test is happy, no more red underlines. We'll just verify that this passes because we haven't actually asserted anything yet. So we'll go into the UI directory and go test. Pass. Excellent. Now, we wanted to test that since our server is returning an error, that we get back a 404, or not a 404, a 400 error, so just an error internal. So we'll pull in our expect again. And we will expect that w.result.status code is http.status internal server error, which is, I think, 500. Yes. Now let's run this. Fail. 200 is not 500. So yeah, it's going to return 200 okay by default. We want to just go ahead and do w.write header http.status internal server error. Ta-da, passing test. So let's try to refactor this a little bit. So what I want to do now is create, we're going to do some table-driven testing. I'll say type, actually I'll put it in here, type test, it's a struct, and in here it's going to take a service, which is a pointer to a mock service. It's going to take an input method, so our HTTP method, our input URL, body we don't care about. Then, okay, that's all the things we can input here. Then we'll just do expected error, it's an error, and expected do's is a list of entities.todo. Okay, then we can sort of write just a general purpose. Oh, this should also have names. I always forget that. Then we can do tests equals array of test 4. Don't care about the index. Test equals range tests. We'll do t.run test.name func. So service we don't need anymore because that's in our test. And in here we'll put test.input method, test.input URL, test.service, and expected status as well. I'm sorry. No expected error, expected status. Expect w.result.status code to be test.expected status. And then we'll also write the test for expected to-dos. Okay, that should be it for our test function. And then all we have to do is fill up this tests variable with an array of tests to perform. So the name of this one is going to be random error gives 500 status and no to-dos. So service is going to be that same service that we made before with an error of error, something bad happened. Input method get input URL mywebsite.com expected status 500, and I'm gonna leave expected to-dos blank for now, so it's gonna default to nil. And I'm wondering if the JSON unmarshalling is going to make this an empty array or if it's going to make it nil. So it might fail or it might not fail. We'll see. It passed. Okay, so what if I expect an empty array? It fails. Okay, so it's going to give me nil, which is, I think, what we want. That's good enough. Next thing that we want to do is sort of start protecting against the wrong, if you give the wrong URL or the wrong method, it should not allow that, basically. So we'll start with the wrong path. You know, I think let's say that this exists on the to-dos path. So it should be to-dos / not just the root path. Okay. Name wrong path gives I forget what the HTTP status is for that. Oh, that's a 404, I think. If you, yeah. So wrong path gives 404 status and no to-dos. Service and service. Let's just say that there are some to-dos. So we'll give it some, I'm going to define the dummy to-dos elsewhere so that we don't clutter up our test here. Did we already define some dummy to-dos over here? Yeah. I'm just going to copy those. Okay. That means in here, our to-dos can just be dummy to-dos. Input method, get, input URL, website.com/foo. This should be wrong. Expected status, 404, and no to-dos. 500 is not 404. Okay, so let's go into our HTTP here, and we're going to have to write an if statement about the path here. So we'll say if r dot URL dot path equals /foo, w.write header HTTP dot status not found, and return. This should pass our test. Excellent. Let's write another test because foo is not the only wrong path. So far, all these tests prove is that to-dos is a correct path and foo is a wrong path. It doesn't really tell us that one is the only correct path and that all other paths are wrong. We're going to have to write a few more wrong path tests to kind of imply that. So I'll just copy and paste this test, and we'll keep the same name. What the test runner will actually do is if you have two tests with the same name, it'll number them. It'll do like wrong path gives 404 status and no to-dos 1, wrong path gives 404 status and no to-dos 2, which is actually kind of good because we're testing sort of the same thing here. They can have the same name. So input URL, foo, we'll change this to bar. And this fails because all it's testing for right now is foo. So what we really want to do is actually reverse this condition. Or rather, we can say if r.url.path does not equal /to-dos, write header status not found, and that passes. So what if we write a success case though, where there's no trailing slash? So we want it to match trailing slash or no trailing slash. And we can do that by, we'll just duplicate this test, copy, paste. Okay, this should still give us a 500 instead of a 404. It fails. 404 is not 500. So what we'll do here is we could do this one of two ways. We can either do a regular expression to match it, you know, like this, like, is there a slash or not? Do we care? No. But since this is only two options, I'm just going to put in a little or case here. Maybe, oh, should we be using an and here? Does that make more sense? That probably does. Oops. Yeah, so if the path is not to-dos and the path is not to-dos without a trailing slash, yeah, that makes sense. Okay, that should pass our test. Very good. Now we'll start testing for different methods. So wrong method gives 405, I believe. Just double check that. Yeah, 405. Service. And let's input method. Let's do, I don't want to copy and paste everything for all the different methods because that seems like a lot. So what we'll do is we'll just do a little append here. So we'll say for methods. There's a list of strings that contains http.method. I'm not going to worry about connector trace. So delete we're probably going to want in the future, but not for this endpoint. So just delete we should not allow. Disallowed methods. Options. Method patch. Post. Put. Okay, that's all of them. So for method range disallowed methods tests equals append tests. Oops. Name actually we'll do oops. Okay, so instead of writing an entire entry in our tests array for each of the different methods, we just went ahead and wrote a little for loop to go through them and insert a test for each. And that's a little bit ugly, so I'm going to put that in a separate function down here. We need test to be in scope for that. So let's move this out of here. We'll put it there, we'll call it HTTP test. Okay, that's a little bit better. Test equals append tests. Get disallowed method tests. ... Excellent. Now we'll run all of those and watch them fail. Oh. Is it not running them? I'll do -v. Method delete gives 500. Oh, well, it shouldn't be 500. It should be 405. Okay, now they all fail. 500 is not 405. Excellent. And we can make this pass real easy by saying if our dot method does not equal http.methodGet w.writeHeader status method not allowed and return. Yay, we did it. Okay. Now we can actually start testing that we are calling our service. So we'll add on a test here. Name. So when service returns error, what are the errors that it can return? Oh, error internal. Well then. It's never going to return any other kind of error. So we already covered the error internal case. Okay, so let's say returns to-dos from service if no error. Service. And mock service to-dos. Dummy to-dos. Input method get input URL http mywebsite.com/to-dos expected status 200 expected to-dos dummy to-dos, and this will fail miserably. 500 is not 200. So let us go in here and we'll say server. We're going to have to actually use our service. So in order to do that, we need to fill out this use service method. Let's see. Okay, let's try this. We'll just do JSON.newEncoder w.encode to-dos. And we'll see what that does. Okay, so now we're getting this error. It's passing our new test, but it's saying 200 is not 500. So when our service returns an error, we're still just giving it an empty list of to-dos and a 200 status code, which is not what we want. We need to check for that error. If error not equal nil, w.writeHeader b.status internal server error and return. And this should pass every single one of our tests. And we are now done with our HTTP server. Functionally, we should split this up into multiple functions though. So server HTTP server HTTP. So we can sort of combine these into a function verify request, right? So func verify request. We're actually going to scope this into our HTTP server so that it's not cluttering up our whole package space in case we have other user interfaces. Verify request. Okay, this is going to take in our HTTP response writer. And our HTTP request. And we need a way to return, we need a way to say whether or not that request was valid. So we'll just return a Boolean here. Move this down here. And in either of these cases, we'll return true. I'm sorry, false, because it was no good. It is not verified. And we'll return true. So here we'll say server.verify request. Okay, so we shortened that up a little bit. Now we'll do to-dos error equals server.service.getAllToDos if error not equal nil. w.writer status internal server error return. Code the to-dos. I think that's about as short as we can get it here. Yeah, that looks pretty good to me. Next thing is going to be to clean up our test file, because this has gotten messy. Our mock service, get all to-dos. We'll kind of leave this stuff up here. I'm going to actually put in a comment here because I like to visually separate things like this. So we'll say, we'll just write mock service here. Okay, and then dummy to-dos. Just to vertically separate things a little more, because comments give you that ability. Okay. HTTP test. Main test. Okay. Now this function, this test HTTP function, I think is much too large. Let's extract this to a function called getTests. And we'll return test. And then up here, we'll just go ahead and copy all of this. Okay, I think that reads a lot better. And then here, we'll just create another function. Test HTTP with a lowercase t. I kind of like doing this convention so we can get rid of all that extra indentation. It's going to take in testing.t, of course, and then the test. And we should be able to extract all of this then into here. Okay, now this is the main test. I think that's a little bit more readable. It is still almost a 200-line file, but testing can do that. Okay, we've got our HTTP server all tested up and ready to go. that will conclude this episode. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.